Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Agile track. It's great to see some familiar faces from yesterday. We had a great day, 6 Agile sessions yesterday and 6 more today. So if you like this talk, please look at some others in the Agile track. I'd also encourage you to use your mobile apps to rate and review your presenters. It's really, really helpful for them. I'm Max, and I met Joyce when she was working as a designer, yet I met her at an Agile conference. It was interesting to me. She was taking charge and learning these Agile fundamentals just to help her team be better. Nowadays, as an Agile Scrum Master, she's helping Atlassian be better themselves. Now, for people in the back, I'd encourage you to find seats up front, and maybe people can scooch into the middle to make other seats more available. But I think that there's no one better to teach us about these Agile fundamentals today. Please help me in welcoming Joyce Vargas.
Good morning. So change is painful, and growth is painful. It can feel nebulous and uncomfortable. But nothing is as painful as staying stagnant and stuck where you are. I'm Joyce Vargas from Atlassian, and I'd like to invite you on a journey of embracing change. Whether you're new to Agile or you're a seasoned expert, let's start back at the beginning. So it's February 2001 in Snowbird, Utah. And these 17 people have gathered to talk, ski, relax, try to find common ground. They all came from the world of software development, and they had one thing in common. They were all deeply dissatisfied by the way the world built software. They felt strongly that software development was a heavyweight process at the time, largely driven by documentation, without much concern for the people actually building it. And they wanted to figure out a better way. These men were innovators, and they were all involved in developing lightweight methods, which was a budding field at the time. So Ken Schwaber and Jeff Sutherland, they developed a lightweight method called Scrum in 1995. And Kent Beck created another lightweight method called Extreme Programming, or XP, the following year. And there were representatives from other methods like adaptive software development, Crystal, feature-driven development. And much like what we're doing today, they spent their time sharing ideas and trying to find common ground. And they liked this idea of writing a document that would capture this common ground that they felt they were discovering. And that would sort of act as a rallying cry to the software industry. The problem was that no one liked the term lightweight. They felt that it missed the point. Because the approaches they were developing, the purpose was not that they were lightweight. That was more just a symptom. So finally, they agreed to call it Agile, because they felt that it captured the adaptiveness and the response to change that they felt was so important to these lightweight methods that they were developing. And at the end of their 2-day gathering, they published this document, and they called it the Manifesto for Agile Software Development. It was a call to arms and a statement of beliefs, and it talked about what they stood for, what they were opposed to. And the document said, "We are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others do it. And through this work, we have come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan." And they also came up with 12 principles behind the manifesto. So this is a poster of those 12 principles, but let me break them down for you. They had to do with customer satisfaction, welcoming changing requirements, even late in development, delivering software frequently, having business people and development team members work together daily, to build projects around motivated individuals, and that the best form of communication is face-to-face. They said working software is the primary measure of progress, And they promoted sustainable development, so maintaining a constant pace of work continuously and indefinitely. They said to pay attention to technical excellence, that simplicity is essential, and finally, that the best teams work around being self-organizing. And there's one more, that teams should retrospect and tune their behavior regularly. So after 2 days, they all left Snowbird, and they left with varying expectations. And Martin Fowler said, "I just hope that greater communication would lead to something interesting. I didn't expect much at that meeting." Now today, 18 years later, we know that the rest is history. Agile is now a household term in the world of software development. And we're all familiar with Agile practices like sprints, user stories, stand-up, Kanban story points. And sometimes it seems like Agile is defined by these practices, and many people do indeed get very caught up in them. But notice the manifesto authors, they never mentioned anything about stand-ups or sprints. That's because the heart of Agile is much more than just a set of practices that you do. You can't do Agile, you become Agile. It's this state of being. And that's a sentiment that's becoming more and more apparent in recent years. A recent Forbes article stated, Agile as a concept is finally coming of age as a philosophy and a way of thinking, in lieu of being seen as a mere project management methodology. So Agile seems to go way beyond software development. We know it's a term that describes the manifesto, it's this way of thinking. But what exactly is this Agile philosophy or this Agile way of thinking? This way of thinking is empiricism. So empiricism is the theory that all knowledge is derived from experience. So in an empirical environment, I make decisions based on my observations around me rather than planning or feelings or opinions. Pilots, for example, are taught empiricism. When they fly a plane and they see a storm up ahead, they don't continue with their plan. Of course, they will course correct and adjust based on the observation of the environment around them. And empiricism is the foundation of Scrum, the most commonly practiced Agile framework. The 3 pillars of Scrum are transparency, inspect, and adapt. So transparency is presenting the facts as is, and inspection can be done for your product, processes, people, and improvements. And adaptation is adopting change based on the results of your inspection. And Scrum is designed around these 3 pillars. It prescribes events like daily Scrum, where you're transparent with each other. You inspect what you did yesterday, today, any blockers, and then you adapt your plan accordingly. And the same goes for other Scrum events and other things like changing business and customer needs. Extreme programming also aligns with empiricism, with its core tenet being to embrace change. So if customer requirements have changed dramatically, then a team will acknowledge it and welcome it, and then they'll plan a new course of action in their next iteration planning session. But empiricism didn't start with the manifesto authors. Throughout history, we actually see a similar storyline played out, where there are different people in different eras that put empiricism into practice. And like the manifesto authors, all of these people sought a better way of working. So back in the 1600s, Bacon and Galileo, they thought there was a better way to understand the world around them. And among others, they played a key role in inventing the scientific method, which, as we all know in high school, the scientific method entails making a hypothesis, conducting an experiment, observing the results, and then deriving a conclusion based on your observation. So it's an empirical method. And Bacon and Galileo redefined the way modern science was practiced to this day. Fast forward to 1950, William Deming was an American engineer and professor and consultant. And he went to Japan in 1950, and he started teaching his philosophy on quality and productivity. And he was largely unknown in America until later in life, but he's considered the Japanese patron saint of quality control. And he's widely credited with the industrial resurgence in Japan after World War II. So much so that the most coveted industrial award in Japan is called the Deming Prize. And it's still awarded and very highly esteemed today. So Deming invented the Deming wheel, which is this way of working where you plan, do, study, act, or the PDSA cycle. And this is also sometimes known as plan, do, check, act, or PDCA. It's a quality control model that's based on empiricism. Notice that the PDCA cycle, it closely resembles our modern software development cycle. And that's because Agile frameworks like Scrum, they are a PDCA cycle. We plan our development work, we do or we implement it, we check or we validate and test it, and then we take action to continuously improve with every iteration or every sprint. Now fast forward to 1970, a man named Winston Royce, he published a paper called Managing the Development of Large Software Systems. And he was also exploring how software development could be improved. And in his paper, he had this infamous diagram, and it described the linear approach to software development. And the diagram, it resembled a waterfall. So progress flowed in one sequential direction through these distinct phases. And many people, they mistakenly credit Royce as the inventor of waterfall, even though there were others before him that had mentioned it. And Royce, he only included this diagram to communicate in his paper that it was a flawed model. He said, he wrote about it critically, and he said, the implementation is risky and invites failure. And in my experience, this simpler method has never worked on large software development efforts. So as you might know, waterfall introduces knowledge silos with handoffs, a lack of shared responsibilities, and it often can lead to missed or rushed deadlines, going over budget, and high risk. So ironically, Royce was an early Agilist, and a lot of his paper focused on principles that were not unlike those in the manifesto, the Agile Manifesto. So he talked about working iteratively and prototyping and involving the customer. But nevertheless, this image stuck, and waterfall became the predominant way that the world built products and software for a long time. And in many ways, a lot of waterfall principles are still ingrained in the way we work today. Now fast forward to the 1980s. Kaoru Ishikawa was a Japanese organizational theorist and a professor, and he spent his life trying to make people think differently about the way they work. He's well known for inventing this fishbone cause and effect diagram, which is used to determine the root causes to quality problems. So consistent with empiricism, Ishikawa's model, it focused on making problems visible so that you can identify the changes needed to improve them. And he's considered the father of Japanese quality control, and he was largely influenced by Deming and the PDCA cycle. Around that same time, a man named Taiichi Ohno, he was working to change the way manufacturing worked. So previously, the primary method of manufacturing was the assembly line, which closely resembled waterfall, where the work moved from station to station sequentially. And Ohno knew that the assembly line was great for producing something known at great volume, but he found that it didn't work well for the complex process of auto manufacturing. And Ohno worked at Toyota. He started as a shop floor supervisor, and then he slowly made his way up to an executive. And while he was at Toyota, he developed the Toyota Production System, or TPS. Like Ishikawa, he focused on making problems visible so improvements could be made. And his whole philosophy was to eliminate waste to achieve the best possible efficiency. He invented this concept of just-in-time, which is making only what's needed, when needed, at every stage of production. And thanks to his innovation, Toyota became the leading auto manufacturer in the world. And American manufacturers started studying them, and this became known in the Western world as lean manufacturing. TPS is where Kanban originated. So the characters kan and ban, they literally translate to look and board, or we can think of it as look at the board or a sign board. So the purpose of a Kanban board is to visualize your system of work, where work is pulled into each phase in this just-in-time manner. Of course, we commonly use Kanban boards in our development workflows today. It's a way to make our work visible and to surface problems or blockers at the moment that they occur. And we have practices like limiting your work in progress, which originated from the concept of just in time. So working only on what's needed, when needed, at every stage of development. So it was this rich history and context that led up to the creation of the Agile Manifesto. And the manifesto authors, they were very familiar with those that came before them. And all of these people, they were linked by this common thread. They were all agents of change in their status quo, and they all understood empiricism. The manifesto authors, they took these ideas from lean thinking and empiricism, and they applied them to software development. And they changed the world around them. So we've explored the origins of Agile. We know it comes from the manifesto. It's this way of thinking, and it has this rich historical context. But what does Agile mean today? I think Ahmed Sidki described it best. He's a well-known Agile thought leader, also known as Dr. Agile. And he says, Agile is a growth mindset. It's a way of working grounded in a culture of learning. So that means in an Agile environment, when I learn something, I'm able to incorporate it. Because incorporated learning is empiricism. Sidki says Agile is a mindset described by 4 values, defined by 12 principles, and manifested through an unlimited number of practices. So the 4 values are the values we saw in the Agile Manifesto. The 12 principles are the principles behind the manifesto. And then the practices, we can think of them like tools in a toolbox. So you can use any number of them in any combination together. And that's a good thing. So Sidki says, once you limit the number of practices you do, you limit your agility. And I think often in Agile, we focus too heavily on the practices themselves, the doing part. But the practices, they're not the end goal. They're really just a means of carrying out the Agile mindset and the values and the principles, this Agile state of being or this way of thinking. So what does this look like then in practice? Well, let me tell you about one of my own teams. As Max said, I have a background in user experience, and not long ago I was a designer at Trello. So we were a fully remote team. As you know, Trello is largely remote. But every year we had a chance to meet in person for an offsite. So here we are in New York, very cold. So this team is made up of product and engineering, design, and QA. And this is a team that went on an Agile journey. So not too long ago, we were plagued with a bunch of pain points in the way that we worked. So maybe you can relate to some of these things. We did Agile things like sprints and committing to a goal, but we never delivered on our commitments, and our work consistently dragged on for weeks and months. We were using t-shirt sizes to estimate, but our estimates were never really accurate, and it kind of felt like a pointless exercise. And we couldn't really reliably predict when we would get work done, so it made collaborating with stakeholders very difficult. We often found out mid-sprint that work wasn't truly ready for development. So there were still a lot of questions and complexities, dependencies to resolve. And so this kind of resulted in stalled work and where we had to go and do some rework. Our work often came out of development near the end of a sprint. So that meant our tester was faced with this mountain of work to get through in a very short window of time. And we found that our meetings weren't valuable. They felt inefficient. And we had meetings like grooming and planning, but there wasn't a clear distinction between them. And we found that discussions weren't always relevant to everyone. So in theory, we were a team, but in practice, we were really just a group of highly talented individuals, often working independently in this remote context, and not truly collaborating. And we felt disconnected from each other and the work that we were supposed to be doing together. And this impacted our morale negatively. So through a journey, we decided to adopt Agile values and principles and to leverage different Agile practices. And we strived to use them as they were designed. And we decided to try this for 2 months only so we could evaluate if it would work for us. So first we adopted Scrum, again, the most commonly practiced Agile framework. And I like to describe Scrum as 2-3-3-5. So together as a team, we crafted 2 definitions, a definition of ready and a definition of done. And this gave us a shared understanding of when work was truly ready for development, and then when work was considered done in a sprint. And then we selected 3 new roles based on what Scrum prescribes. So again, at the time I was a designer, but it worked out that design work was very light at the time. It was mainly a back-end software development project. And so I took on the Scrum Master role. And I was responsible for coaching everyone to uphold the Scrum framework and values, and then to serve the team by removing impediments. We also selected a product owner that was accountable to business value and that was empowered to guide the team. And then we had a self-organizing development team that was, again, accountable to one another and then functioned as a unit. We also adopted the 3 Scrum artifacts. This is the product backlog, which is a prioritized list of all the work that you need to do. The sprint backlog, which contained all the work that we plan to do every sprint. And then this working increment of software, which is potentially shippable. So this was the value that we aim to deliver through each sprint. And then we also revamped and improved our 5 Scrum events. So sprint planning, daily Scrum, the sprint itself, sprint review, and sprint retrospective. So this is what our development cycle looks like. And Scrum gave us a really robust framework for planning and checking our work and our process, so that PDCA cycle. But Scrum doesn't actually prescribe how to execute on your work. So what do you actually do in a sprint? And so we went to our toolbox and we leveraged many other Agile practices in combination with Scrum. Because remember, Agile is manifested through an unlimited number of practices, and they're tools that help us to carry out the Agile values and principles. So here is a list of some of the additional practices that we adopted. And I'll dive into more detail on how each of these played out. So one principle that we focused on was to radiate information. And this is all about fostering transparency, that first pillar of Scrum, or empiricism. Because only with transparency can you then effectively inspect and adapt. So we radiated information through our team Kanban board. And our old board looked something like this. And it did a decent job of visualizing the development workflow, but design and anything pre-development was this black hole. And so we revamped our board and we added columns to map out the pre-development workflow. And this helped to make design work visible, and it exposed blockers that arose earlier on in earlier phases. And remember those 2 definitions that we crafted, the definition of ready and definition of done? We also radiated this information. We made it visible by posting it on a team dashboard in a central place. And then we also embedded it in our user stories, which I'll show you in a bit. And our team was empowered to revisit these definitions, and we would tweak them together as needed. We started tracking our velocity, which showed us how much work we could accomplish per sprint, or our capacity. And again, we radiated this information. We made it visible by putting it in a central place. And then we looked at it together every sprint planning and retro to build this shared context and to help inform our discussions. So now our sprint commitments, they're based on real historical data, and they're that much more viable. Another metric that we started using was a burn down chart, and this showed us how much work that we were completing or burning down through each day. And again, we radiated this information. We pulled it up every every daily stand-up, and it encouraged us to make incremental progress, to deliver work each day of the sprint, rather than having it pile up and have a bunch of work in progress at the end. And then in addition to the actual work, we also fostered transparency around team health. So as the Scrum Master, I sent out just a Google survey every sprint, and I asked people to rate their happiness. This was anonymous, but again, the information was shared, was radiated, and we pulled it up at the beginning of every retro to help frame our discussion. So if there were 3s, then we knew, it was pretty clear we had things to discuss and things to improve upon. We also pushed to increase the frequency of our communication. So for a team to work well together, they have to talk to each other a lot. One of the principles behind the manifesto, again, is the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. But we were a remote team, so we were never, ever face-to-face. So for us, this meant we needed more meetings. And I know that more meetings, it doesn't sound like an improvement. We've all had those meetings where you meet to schedule another meeting, and there's even this book called Death by Meeting. But what we realized is that we didn't need fewer meetings. That wasn't the root problem. What we needed was meetings with more value. And so again, we revisited those 5 Scrum events according to their original purpose. And we created a focused agenda for each one. And we made it visible in our screen shares, in our remote video calls. And just simply doing this gave everyone a shared context and also expectation for our discussions. And everyone was then empowered to call off if we were going off track from the agenda. And we did things like if we had shorter meetings, we would schedule them back to back to avoid that dead time between meetings and to give ourselves larger chunks of work time. And we found that our meetings were more focused, more efficient, and they often ended early. And everyone was more engaged and expressed that this extra face time helped them feel more like a team. We also adopted daily Scrum, which is essentially a daily stand-up, but we made improvements according, again, to the original intent of a daily Scrum. So we kept it time-boxed to 15 minutes, and then we focused our 3 questions around the sprint goal. So rather than just saying a general update of what'd you do yesterday, today, any blockers, we changed it according to what the Scrum Guide says. So what did you do yesterday that helped the team meet the sprint goal? And what will I do today to help the team meet the sprint goal? And then finally, do I see any impediment that prevents me or my team from meeting the sprint goal? So it's such a small detail that made a really big difference. We only involved people that were directly then working on the sprint goal in the daily Scrum. So unlike before when this was a status meeting that dragged on for 40 minutes, it became a huddle like it was meant to be. And we were able to collaborate and ask for help and mitigate risks on a daily basis. And it often took us no more than 5 minutes. So with this increased frequency of communication, it's important to keep the team and meeting size small. So you can see on the left there, as the number of people increase, your lines of communication get increasingly complex. So we aim to only involve people in meetings that were directly involved in the work at hand. And you may have heard of Jeff Bezos' 2-pizza rule, which says you should be able to feed everyone in your meeting with no more than 2 pizzas. So with this smaller group, we found that we had more focus, we were much more efficient, and we could make decisions that much faster. And then we also followed this lean principle of working in small units of work. So we adopted user stories, and we aimed to keep the scope of each one very small and granular. So this is a template user story card that we created in Trello. It's a simple format that could be easily repeated across cards. And then as part of our backlog refinement process, we wrote acceptance criteria, and we used the behavior-driven development format. So again, leveraging different Agile practices. And we also embedded that definition of ready directly in our user story card. So we don't allow work to be pulled into a sprint if it's too unclear. It has to first meet this agreed-upon definition of ready. So now at the point of development, all questions are answered, and then work is ready to be picked up immediately. And we avoid that rework down the line. We also adopted tasking, which blended really well with our definition of done. And we also embedded this directly in our user story card, again, so that it was visible. And it gave us this clear understanding of progress. So anytime in a sprint, you could look at a card and you knew exactly what it meant for it to be done. And it gave us this shared understanding of our collective work. So in the past, when we were working in these larger batches, our sprint board looked more like this. So our system of work, it had no flow. We had many dependencies, and we had these large batches of piled up work that could easily be stalled or blocked. And the quality of our work was compromised. And we couldn't deliver value at this sustainable pace because we were so often impeded. On the flip side, when we started working in these small, manageable units, each piece of work had less complexity and less risk. And so we could work in flow, where our work went through the system piece by piece, unimpeded at a sustainable pace with great efficiency. And now this team can complete stories and deliver value incrementally, even by day one of a sprint. So instead of creating this bottleneck at the end. We also changed the way that we estimate. So we adopted agile estimation techniques. So agile estimates are based on relative values rather than absolute values. So for example, it's much easier for me to estimate the amount of water in a glass if I use relative values. So I can say the amount of water in this glass is large relative to that one, which is medium, and I'd be fairly accurate in my estimate. But if I use absolute values like ounces, that would be much harder, and I'd also be much more likely to be inaccurate with my estimate. So we took these same principles and we moved away from time-based estimates because those are based on absolute values of hours and days and weeks. And instead we adopted relative parameters. So we estimate based on relative effort, risk, complexity, and uncertainty. And now we have much more confidence and accuracy in our estimates. We also adopted story pointing, which evolved out of the Fibonacci sequence, which is a relative scale that's found in nature. And then we used another agile tool, planning poker, to conduct our estimation sessions. And this allowed us to do it in a way that avoided cognitive bias. We also used to estimate by individual. So a developer would estimate for dev effort, QA would estimate for testing effort, et cetera. But now we estimate for collective effort. So every individual estimates for their own work, but also everybody else's collectively. And basically, this is a more accurate reflection of reality because for work to get across a sprint, it involves everybody's work. So we estimate for all of that. And it also fosters this empathy across disciplines because team members, they start to learn and take into account not just their workload, but everyone's workload. Also, instead of estimating at just one point in time, we make course estimates at early planning stages, and then we refine the estimates at later stages. So the course estimates, they're made at this point of high uncertainty early on. So they're very rough, and we know that. And they're mainly used for planning, and we know they're going to change later. So then we revisit it when the work is better defined. And this goes back to empiricism. So we adapt our estimate based on new learnings. And then finally, we also estimate in priority order. So we estimate highest value items first. So like the authors of the manifesto, our team sought to improve the way that we work. And we formed this culture of continuous improvement. We ended up finding a ton of value in Agile, and so we ultimately decided to continue with it. And of course, we're not a perfect team, but we made huge strides. Unlike before, where we had work carry over, we now consistently finish most of our sprints, and we can deliver real customer value faster instead of carrying work across weeks and months. And it gives us this sense of accomplishment and progress. So Agile concepts, they're easy to understand but difficult to master. But teams that diligently seek to embody these Agile values and principles they can expect great results, like delivering faster with increased value and increased quality. So Agile turns development upside down. It allows increased flexibility in the actual work done. So with Waterfall, your scope is fixed, but your time and budget are flexible. And that often means that work can take longer or cost more because you have flexibility there. But with Agile, it's completely flipped. So your time or your sprint time box and your budget are fixed, but your scope is flexible. And so you can adjust the scope as your business needs or customer needs change. So then you can focus your scope on delivering value. And this aligns with that principle of welcoming changing requirements, even late in development. Agile is designed for complexity and uncertainty. So this is a Stacy matrix, and it depicts a model for understanding complexity. So if work is largely known, then I only need to execute on it. And Waterfall works really well in this realm of simplicity. But if I have a lot of unknowns, then I need to try things and I need to iterate. And Agile is designed for this. It kind of lives in this area of complexity and uncertainty, where we can employ empiricism. And then there's chaos, where there's just maximum uncertainty in your technology and scope, and nothing really works well here. Agile also smooths out your pattern or your pace of work. So with Waterfall, your pattern of working looks more like the gray line with the peaks and valleys, big pushes followed by lulls. So you might have a big release coming up, and everyone is pushing towards it. You're working nights and weekends. And then once that is done, there's this lull. Your work slows down. It kind of goes in that pattern. But with Agile, one of the core principles was to promote this steady, predictable pace of productivity that's continuous. So your work pattern looks more like the dark squiggly line. And as teams get used to this rhythm, they get better at collaborating, and then we avoid things like over-specialization or burnout. Agile also reduces risk. So with Waterfall, your issues or your risks, they're not uncovered in the early requirements phase, and they're typically not discovered until delivery at the end of a project. But with Agile, again, we're promoting a steady, constant pace of delivery and value creation, so we deliver work every sprint. So your risks are found, and you can mitigate or resolve them frequently and early on. Agile also advocates for small, dedicated teams. So with Waterfall, you have specialized disciplines that hand off work. So that means you'll have one discipline that is idle, and then the other that's engaged. And so the idle folks, they'll start to work on something else. And then you end up with this big group of people that are doing a lot of context switching. So this chart shows the time lost as the number of projects or your context switching increases. But with Agile, we remove this waste of time lost by advocating for team members that are 100% dedicated and collaborating with each other every step of the way. Agile also embraces T-shaped skills. So this doesn't mean that you're a jack of all trades or a master of none. It means that you have skills that are deep in one area and then wide across others. Because remember, Agile is this growth mindset. So it means that you're not limited in your work by what your job title says that you do. So this is why I could be a designer and do this Scrum Master work. So a team with T-shaped skills, they're truly cross-functional because their roles can overlap and they can support each other and be that much more efficient. So continuous improvement is better than delayed perfection, and this is what Agile is all about. I don't think we'll ever arrive at this perfect state in the way that we work, but Agile provides us this mindset to improve continuously. And as we get better at the way that we work, our products improve and our customers benefit. And creating value leads to more value. Thank you very much. Should we do questions?
We have time for maybe one question.
Hi. First off, thank you so much. What if your development team is all in for Agile, but yet your leadership team and product council, their timelines are not? That's the struggle we're in. So we do t-shirt sizing and grooming and planning, and our product council has to approve our projects based on those t-shirt size or subset of hours.
Sure, yeah.
How do you does it have to be bought in at every level across the organization?
Yeah, I think it definitely helps to have top-down buy-in, for sure. I don't think there's a easy answer for you because that's really hard. But Agile does, account for the business, and it has things in place for that. So one great example is the sprint review in Scrum, where you invite stakeholders at the end of every sprint, to demo the work and to collaborate on your next priorities. So that's one way, but it is hard because you're talking about, Agile at scale, where it's not just one team, where you have to work across teams. Yeah.
Thanks, Joyce.
Thank you.